Ladies and gentlemen, you watch Corridor 8 podcast. We are with Greg Chachoff, part of the series Alive in the MPO. And Greg Chachoff is a long-time member of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization and president of the MPO Freedom Chapter in Columbus, Ohio. His family has been involved with the MPO for generations, and he has been a direct witness and participant in the history of the organization for decades. His memories and personal impressions are an exceptional source of information about the development and processes in this remarkable organization of the Macedonian Bulgarians in the United States and Canada, and their struggle for freedom, human rights, and Macedonia for all Macedonians, regardless of their nationality or religion. Today's topic is dedicated to the relationship between MPO and the last leader of the internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, Ivan Mihailov. Mr. Chachoff, welcome back to Corridor 8.
Great to be here.
It's our pleasure and honor.
Thank you.
The history of MPO as the overseas representation of the internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization. Can you describe how Ivan Mihailov exercised influence and control over MPO?
I think the best way to put it is, I'm assuming from the very beginning, at least from the very beginning of my recollections, Ivan Mihailov was the leader. He was the one that everybody, all the leadership in the MPO looked towards for guidance, for clarity, for, I don't want to say instructions, but maybe that's an easy way to put it, on how the MPO was to move forward. My first recollection of all that is, as a child, I can remember my parents talking about it. I remember when I was in high school, which meant I would have been about 17, 16 years old, they got a letter from Ivan Mihailov. I mean, that was a very big moment for them. So, as my mother always said, how accurate is not important. And the reason I'm mentioning this is what her state of mind was. She said, if we ever have a free and independent Macedonia, Ivan Mihailov's going to be the leader. He's going to be the one that's going to lead that country. So from a very early age, it was instilled upon me that the MPO was operating to support him and at his instruction. And, as time went on, those things may have changed, and there may have been more encouragement for the decisions to be made strictly based upon what people felt was best for the MPO in the United States and Canada. But, it was always, from what I observed, it was always what Ivan Mihailov's thoughts were that were the guiding principles.
And can you give us some examples of the way he put his impact on the ideology, the political views, and the actions of the organization, especially in the early decades of your life?
The first thing I think of when you mention that is at the convention every year usually it was on Sunday afternoon, they would read the letter that he had sent. And unfortunately for me, I had absolutely no idea what was being said because it was all in Bulgarian. It wasn't in English. and it was incredibly long. But beyond that, there was a push for a long time to get his memoirs published,
Hmm.
and it was a very proud moment for the MPO when they were able to do that. And, again, along that same thought, I really wish that there was a way we could get these translated to English because, one, I would love to read them, but I would also think there's a lot of information there that isn't accessible for a lot of people. And it would be really nice if somehow we could find a way to get those translated to English. But yeah, I think for me, those were the two big things. The fact that so much time at the convention was devoted to that letter from him, and there was a lot of effort to get those memoirs published. And so I would expect, and I'm sure that people can go back and look at those letters that he did send to the convention and see exactly what his instructions were. And I'm sure there was a lot of guidance and a lot of information that you know was presented to the delegates that they could take back to their organizations as to how he felt the MPO should move forward.
It seems that he was the undisputable authority for the founding fathers of the MPO, the first generations. But it's really interesting how this chain of generations was broken in a certain way because the youngest, like you, couldn't understand.
That's
The
a really
language.
good point. That makes a lot of sense. Everything that I know about Ivan Mihailov is based upon what I've heard other people say and what I was able to read. And fortunately, there's enough information there where it's undeniable that he was the driving force behind everything, and that people look for him. The Central Committee, the leaders from the various cities look to him for guidance. And I mentioned this last week, and when I was about 12 years old, 11 years old, Arsen Avramov came to Cincinnati. And I think I mentioned this, and I wish I could find out why, because I don't know. I don't know why he was in Cincinnati. But it was explained to me by my parents who Arsen Avramov was. And I remember having a conversation with him. He was telling me about what his view, his impression of Cincinnati was, particularly how it looked, the geography, the hills, etc. And he compared it to Rome. And we got a book for him about Cincinnati and gave it to him. And when he got back to Rome, he sent us a book about Rome. So, having that conversation with him, it was not related to MPO at all. It was just related to observations that he made about my city. But hearing what my parents and other people have said about him, over the years, I'm like, okay, this was Ivan Mihailov's emissary. And I really wish I knew and why he was there and what they talked about. But everybody's gone. There's nobody to ask. And but that one moment gave me just that little glimpse behind the curtain as to the workings that were taking place in Ivan Mihailov's, we'll call it, in his circle, and then that information coming to the MPO. And just by meeting Ivan Mihailov or Arsen Avramov. A few years after that, while I was on the Central Committee, for one of those years, Borislav Ivanov was also on the Central Committee, and he also had direct, close ties with Ivan Mihailov. So that also gave me some additional direct knowledge and information about him, where it just what a great man. I mean, he devoted his life to the Macedonian cause, literally. He and many others, but he lived a long life, and most of that life was spent to just keep that going, to keep that drive going, and keep that dream alive.
And from what you remember, what did MPO do in order to support the last leader of the historical IMRO? You mentioned the memoirs, several volumes of memoirs.
I think there were 5.
5, okay. Have you heard about something else, like support for his life in Rome, etc., etc.?
Well, there was definitely financial support. And when I first became delegate, the first time I was a delegate, and I was given like my packet, it had the budget and the annual report and what the projected budget for the next year was going to be. And there was always a line item for the monthly payment that they sent to support him. The amount, I really don't remember what it was. I honestly don't. But as far as I know, it was ongoing, and it was enough to keep him going in Rome and, do the things that he needed to do. And people donated. I mean, I could remember, I think I mentioned this last week, whenever we had gatherings, at the end of the gathering, everybody would make donations, and they would indicate what that donation was for. And it was usually to stay with the local organization, or for the Macedonian Tribune, or for the cause, Zakazuta. And, I remember asking what that was for. And, it was my understanding, based on what I was told, that when people were donating to the cause, they were essentially donating to support Ivan Mihailov so that he could do the things that he did.
Also, I see that there are kind of, let's call it educational activities on behalf of the MPO, like this one small brochure. It's called the Macedonian.
I remember that.
I will try to show it on.
Yeah, I see that. Definitely. I remember seeing that.
Macedonian Question on Yugoslavia. It's translated by Chris Anastasov.
Right.
It's an interview with Mihailov, and it is published by the Central Committee of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, Indianapolis, Indiana, 1971. So there are several issues, I think, of this one, plus the memoirs,
right,
plus the iconic work called Macedonia, Switzerland on the Balkans. So everything was published actually by the MPO.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And this idea of Macedonia as a place on the Balkans where different people, regardless of their ethnicity or religion, can live together, like it's in Switzerland. I think it's a very, very popular among the immigration in the United States and Canada, especially the MPO. When you remember from the conventions that you attended through the years, that people speak about Macedonia as a Switzerland on the Balkans, what was the connotation? What was the content in this expression, Switzerland on the Balkans, as a political position, or even as a dream for the MPO members?
I think it was really important. And if you take it literally, just as it says, it demonstrates what the MPO is about. And room for everybody. And regardless of what your ethnicity is, we're all Macedonians. If you define yourself as a Greek, if you define yourself as a Serb, as a Vlach, as a Bulgarian, you know, all of the ethnic groups are listed, you know, in the beginning of the MPO bylaws, in the mission statement. There's room for everybody. And there's a lot of people who, they want to just not look at it as not look at the big picture where it's all inclusive, but just kind of look at that sliver, just like the portion that satisfies whatever their opinion is. For example, in somebody who is anti-MPO and might be pro one of those other ethnicities might say, well, the MPO is not all inclusive. The MPO is just for those of Macedonian Bulgarian origin. Well, that's not true. And that's been the guiding light from the very beginning. Exactly what Ivan Michailov stated in the title of that book. And but putting it in that form and then taking it to reality, that's a challenge. That's a challenge. And if you look at the way things are right now, with the relationship that the MPO may or may not have with the Republic, it's relevant now as well. And we need to look at the bigger picture, not just that narrow view. And that title right there, it says it all. I know that I'm oversimplifying it, but sometimes you don't need to make things complicated. They just evolve that way, unfortunately.
When I think about this idea of Macedonia like a Switzerland on the Balkans, I think that this idea was ahead of its time in certain aspects. I mean, it doesn't seem like this idea was created by people in the late, after the First World War, like 1919, 1920s, 1930s, etc. The book itself, I think it was published in 1950s.
Right.
So this idea is ahead of its time. If we look on the dismembering of Yugoslavia, the Yugoslav wars, we see how chauvinism can drive people and nations to very, very destructive behavior, ethnic cleansing, genocide,
exactly.
etc. And idea of living together, this all-inclusive idea that you mentioned, was a very great example of searching for a democratic, inclusive, tolerant approach to all. And especially on the Balkans, it seems to be a very, very radical and progressive idea. Because on the Balkans, there are several competing national projects.
Yes.
Greek project, Bulgarian project, Serbian project, later the Albanian project.
That's right.
All sides had some, let's say, some arguments and some truths and proofs for their aspirations.
And they went to a lot of trouble to tilt the table in their favor. Yeah. And then here you've got Ivan Michailov saying, Czeki, ima mesto se celi. There's room for everybody.
Ima mesto za svi. Yeah, exactly.
But it's just, I think the passion that people have is what's prevented that viewpoint from being a lot more dominant than what it's become. And hopefully people can be open-minded enough now to say, yeah, you know what? We are what we are. Our roots are what they are. We're not going to change them. But we all share this one common thing, which is that we are Macedonian. And we talked about this, or I mentioned it last week. Here in Columbus, Ohio, there's a lot of Macedonians. There's a lot of Macedonians. Most of them are from the Bitola area. And most of them immigrated after World War II, the 50s all the way up into the 70s, 80s, and longer. So a lot of them grew up or were educated when Macedonia was when they were part of Tito's Yugoslavia. So they had these ideas, this opinion, whatever you want to call it. To fast forward, conversations I had with some of those people, and they do not view me as a Macedonian because I'm not from the part of Macedonia that they're from. They look at me and they tell me, well, TC Bulgarian. I'm like, no, I'm a Macedonian. Ethnically, I define myself as a Macedonian Bulgarian, but we're all Macedonians. No, your family's from Aegean Macedonia. You're not a Macedonian like we are. And that really, two things. I don't want to say it hurts, but it does. But it also shows, the root of our situation. And, had those people grown up or were educated with that more objective viewpoint that there's other types of Macedonians, not just the type that they are, and I hate using that word type, but I can't think of a better one, then maybe we would all be a lot closer now. I don't know. I hope do you understand the point I just made? Because it's really a tough one. And I can remember it for a long time. I'm going to try to keep this short, but for a long time, I was a photographer and I owned a portrait studio, myself and another guy. And we would take pictures at the high schools, the graduation pictures, the school pictures. And I met these two girls that went to one of the schools. They're looking for a job and they were Macedonian. Their families, one of them was from the same village as my wife's father. And the other one was from that same area in Bitola. So they were smart girls. They did a great job. I had them working at the studio. So I had a conversation with one of the girls' father. He happened to be the president of the church here in Columbus, of the Macedonian church. And he's like, so you're in the MPO? And I'm like, yeah, I love the MPO. It's been a part of my life as long as I can remember. And I'm like, you should check it out. The MPO is really, there's a place for everybody, for all types of Macedonians. And he goes, never going to happen. Never. I said, well, what's wrong? What's the problem? And then he just looked at me and he said, the word begins with B. Like, oh, I said, we're not a Bulgarian organization. The MPO is a Macedonian organization, the United States and Canada, and it's open to everybody. It doesn't matter. You just need to be a Macedonian. But it was a dead end. It was, so I bring that up to give you kind of a perspective on what the mindset is, at least in my area here. And I think that you're going to find that all over. And it's too bad because we've got a lot to offer one another. We eat the same food. Our language is the same. And
the songs, the dances,
the dances. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
It makes me a little bit sad. But on the other hand, it also gives me another proof that we have a lot of things to do. We have a lot of work to do in order to improve the situation and to find a mutual understanding. You are all Macedonians, of course.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. In Thrace, where from I come, my family roots, we are all Thracians. The Turks called Thracians like Trakalar, and the Greeks called Thracians like Trachioti, and we, the Bulgarians, say Trakici. So I'm Thracian and Bulgarian, but I can't deny the right of a person from European part of Turkey to say I'm Thracian too. And I can't deny the right of a Greek who lives near the Aegean Sea on southern Thrace when he says I'm a Thracian too. We have to live with this. We have to find a way to live together and share something in common. This is the future. I have one of my most favorite books here is the biography of the great Gotse Delchev, written by one of his best friends, probably the best one, the Bulgarian revolutionary and poet Pejo Yavorov. So in this book, Yavorov quotes a lot of words of Gotse. He put it in quotation marks, so he directly transferred everything that he heard, and he wrote down in his diary. So we have a lot of great words and thoughts of Gotse Delchev thanks to this book. And what we see is that Gotse had a very cosmopolitan perspective on how people should live and share together the land, the territories, with equal human rights, with equal freedoms, and with the same obligations as citizens of the future autonomous Macedonia and Adrianopolitan Thrace. And it is pity that today some people do not understand this broad perspective, which is very democratic, which is very, very open, exactly inclusive, as you said it, and use Gotse or the Internal Revolutionary Macedonian Organization and all other heroes that we know for a narrow-minded, nationalistic purposes. It's absolutely a distortion of the initial ideas of the revolutionary organization. And when we speak about Ivan Mihailov and his place in the history of MPO, I think Mihailov is a direct descendant of the political views of Gotse Delchev in different historical situation, very, very different historical situation, under different social conditions in Macedonia, under very different conditions in the world in general. But he had the same broad vision: equal rights for all, inclusivity, being together, building something together, living together instead of portioning Macedonia in places or trying only one state to grab it all.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's too bad. It's almost a missed opportunity. And had, when all those, again, it's very easy to say things when you look back. But had the MPO made the effort to try and keep those, or try and bring those people into the MPO to demonstrate that inclusivity, as they immigrated, from Yugoslavia in the 50s and 60s and so on, who knows? But I think it was a doomed process from the beginning because of the strong stance and the propaganda that these people were fed as they were growing up, and even after they came here. I'm sure they were receiving some kind of direction as to how they should move on. Now that they're not living in Skopje or Bitola or wherever it might be, but they were I'm sure, getting direction at that point. And the MPO was probably thought of as, the evil empire, the evil organization. That's not who they are. I don't know. And it's too bad.
There's something in my mind that comes now. It's about, you said, the people who came from Vardar Macedonia were fed with a certain, well, probably propaganda is the right word. So they had some certain attitudes about MPO. But also there is something that is broadly used against Ivan Mihailov. It is claimed that he was a fascist. And they say that the internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization under Mihailov was a fascist organization. Now, in my opinion, there is no sense about this, because if the MPO was so closely connected to Mihailov, MPO wouldn't exist in the United States. There was another organization created by the communists in Yugoslavia who was forbidden, I think, for in the late 40s or early 50s. I do not remember exactly. It was exactly such kind of pro-communist organization. And since it was the beginning of the Cold War, this organization wasn't welcome in the United States. It's understandable. But MPO existed. Not just existed. MPO met the President Nixon. You told us this. So obviously MPO was not a fascist organization. So it is not possible Ivan Mihailov to be a fascist.
Right. And I've heard that. And with my opinion on that is, it was just obviously a narrative that was fabricated to promote a cause. And that cause was, anti-MPO, and pro whatever Tito was trying to accomplish, in Yugoslavia. And I think that was the whole point. And, again, I've got limited knowledge, but it's common sense. 1 and 1 does equal 2. We all know that.
Actually, everywhere the communists try to label their political opponents with certain bad words.
Well, and think about it, the same thing happened here in the 60s. So many of people who were protesting the war, leaders of the younger generation, those in the older generation, said they were all communists, that they were being funded and supported by communists, and they were creating a narrative to promote their cause. And so it's the same concept. It's been going on forever. It'll probably continue. And it's up to us as individuals to, decide for ourselves what's right, what's wrong, and to keep as well informed as we can be. And, it's, I don't know. It's just, as long as you've got more than one type of people, you're going to have this. And we'll see.
You said that one of the most expected things on the conventions was the reading of Mihailov's letter in Bulgarian. What were the periods of the strongest influence of Mihailov over MPO, and when his influence started to decline? I suppose some of the things are related with the fact that younger generations like you couldn't understand everything in literally Bulgarian language.
I think that's a big factor. Yeah.
But were there other reasons for his influence in the organization to decline?
Well, I think that decline probably started in the mid late mid to late 70s for a couple of reasons. Things had settled down after the Second World War. The world was kind of stabilized. MPO was, going on from year to year to year. And I don't really know if the forces that were driving the MPO up to that point were as strong as they were. And by that, I mean, I can distinctly remember, yes, people wanted more English. They wanted to see more English in the Tribune. They wanted to see, more English in the meetings. But not only that, there wasn't a clear understanding, as clear as it was earlier, as to what the involvement with the MPO and Ivan Mihailov, or the involvement of MPO and what was going on in Europe. The relevance and the importance, I don't think it was as strong in most people's minds. And I can recall, it's like, no, the MPO is an American and a Canadian organization. We have to focus on what's here. We have to focus on what the MPO needs to be here. So I don't think there was as much emphasis then on what was happening or what needed to happen in Europe as there had been earlier, because things had calmed down and things had stabilized. Plus you saw, or I mean, I could distinctly remember, attendance at the convention was declining. Organizations were no longer in existence that had been. And by the time we got into the 80s, it was important to keep MPO going. And that emphasis then became upon what do we need to do here to keep the MPO alive. So the MPO was kind of redefining itself. And so I think by that time, Ivan Mihailov's relevance within the organization, it had declined. But I think that was natural. I think that was going to happen just because MPO had evolved, and because those people who were the leaders of the MPO for so many years, well, they had died, they disappeared, they were no longer a part of it, and the next generation was taking over. But the transition to that next generation was not smooth. It was not smooth. The younger people were not included in the 60s and early 70s like they needed to be. Had they been, who knows, it might have turned out differently. But and then lastly, of course, Ivan Mihailov himself was getting older. And his relevance in the entire, when you look at the entire picture, it's not what it was 5, 10, 20, 30 years prior. Not what it was when the MPO started. But I do remember this, when he passed away, when we got word that he passed away, I immediately went somewhere and bought a New York Times. And there was an article, there was an obituary about Ivan Mihailov in the New York Times. And I just remembered, of course I was sad, but I had this big smile on my face. And I was like, I remember saying in my mind, looking at the picture and reading the article, you were relevant, Ivan Mihailov. You were very relevant and very important. If the New York Times is going to publish your obituary, and it wasn't just a little tiny thing, it was a nice article. So
Yeah.
it's kind of ironic, but for me, that was a proud moment, because that right there substantiated so much of what he was about and what the MPO was about.
As I remember correctly, previous conversation, you said that some of the people were kind of desperate in this period, like late 70s, maybe because the world was much more stable. They couldn't see solution of the Macedonian question as they thought about it.
Right.
Maybe they didn't see the possible future for Macedonia, like free, independent,
Right.
building its own future. And if you don't have a perspective, if you don't have a horizon, it's understandable that some people might felt desperate or felt powerless to change something. Who could know that actually this period was the calm before the storm?
That's right. That's a good way to put it. It really is. It
Because just 15 years after the late 70s, Yugoslavia was dismembered.
Yep.
And the thing changed. Yeah.
It's, I mean, you know, so here we are now, you know, with this movement within the MPO towards reconciliation. And what are we doing? What is reconciliation? It's essentially what maybe could have been started earlier. But again, you know, we don't have a crystal ball that we can look into. And but hopefully at some point in time, you know, we can get to a space where, you know, that book right there, that title does become a reality, at least in the way Macedonians from different parts of Macedonia get along and the way they view one another. And so,
Yeah, in a certain way, this book can be a reality. I agree with you. And the future, I believe we should dedicate a certain conversation about the future. And you mentioned the reconciliation issue, a very important topic that we fully support. Actually, Macedonia could be whole again,
yeah,
in the European Union without the borders. It just happened now in the beginning of this year, 2025, when Bulgaria and Romania became part of so-called Schengen area of the European Union. That means that we can move from country to country without showing our documents. It's amazing thing.
When you think about it, that is amazing. That is
Yes.
very, very amazing. So you make a good point where in that regard, there is the possibility that there is going to be that freedom of movement within Macedonia, within that map that we see, that
Yeah.
you know that we were hoping to achieve 100 years ago. And so that's a very valid point. I like that.
And I hope that will happen soon, as soon as possible. But there are a lot of things to be done in this field to reach the point of being together again under new circumstances, new conditions, but still being together. Especially North Macedonia as an independent republic and Bulgaria, we have a lot of in common. We can a lot of things to share and to celebrate together.
Sure.
Gotse Delchev is not someone that we should fight to whom he belongs. He belongs to everybody.
I know. That's
This is
exactly
important.
right. That's
And that
exactly right.
will happen. I really believe in this. That will happen, but it takes time. So when we look back again, the time before mid to late 70s, when the decline of Mihailov's influence in the MPO began, when we look at the 50s, 60s, the first half of the 70s, when his impact and leadership were undisputed, and he was the great authority of the organization. As you put it, he could be the leader of independent Macedonia. So at the time, when he was at the peak of his fame, what were the major accomplishments of the MPO? The major things that the organization managed to do, to achieve, following his ideas, following his inspiration, and even probably instructions.
I think the most important part was just adhering to those ideals and founding principles of the MPO, which, if you look at the I guess the bylaws would be the best thing to look at, the original set of bylaws. Well, those are the ideas that we've been talking about, that were Ivan Michailov's ideas. And, that was the founding principle of the MPO. So by adhering to that and maintaining that, that right there, that's a really important piece to the answer of the question you just had. But not only that, it's what the Macedonian Tribune was able to accomplish. It was able to put the word out. It was able to keep the ideas going, to just, I mean, at that time, I think it was coming out every week almost for a while. And then all the other publications. And Chris Anastasov, he had a quarterly publication. I can't remember what it was called, Balkania.
The Tragic Peninsula, maybe the Tragic Peninsula, it's a very, very famous book of Chris.
Right, that as well. But, but I can remember in the 60s, there was a publication that came out, I think it was quarterly. It was called Balkania Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were a lot of scholarly pieces in there. That was a result of the MPO. So, to kind of circle back to your question, by putting the books out, the pamphlets, the Tribune, by continuing the conventions, by supporting whatever efforts Ivan Mihailov was undertaking in Europe through Arsen Avramov and all the other people that worked with him. And they had the society in Brussels as well. They were doing whatever work they needed to do there to maintain, and they were receiving the support to be able to do that. A lot of that was coming from the MPO. So, without that, they may not have been able to promote that. They may not have been able to, publish those articles and those books and do the work that they did in Europe, that I have no idea what it was, but it was happening. And so that's, I think, the most important thing the MPO did to keep the efforts of Ivan Mihailov going. And then, once we got into, that turning point in the 70s, well, we could also see, as things were changing and eventually changed, there were things that were taking place here that, we talked about. There were problems in various cities with organizations, and there was the split in Toronto, and there was the expulsion of an entire organization in Toronto. And what led us to those, I have no idea. But yeah, up until that point, everybody was unified and everybody had that common goal. And evolution, a lot of I don't want to call it a decline, but I can't think of a better way to put it. But a lot of the decline that took place was a result of different ideas, and just a lack of creating the organization, or shifting the organization in a way that embraced more people. And we talked about that with the language barrier, and some of the things that took place at the conventions and the meetings and things. But once again, we can't undo what happened, and we didn't have, I don't know, the foresight or the willingness or ability to look and see how these things were going to have an impact down the road. I think when you look at it, when you look at the big picture, I think things were done as best as they could be done with the information and the tools that the leadership of the organization had at that time.
Mm.
And it's very easy to criticize, but it's very hard to predict. And I don't think anybody had any intentions that were bad. And I think things just played out almost in a natural way, because there were a lot of influences by then. You're talking maybe the third generation, some people fourth generation. And what amazes me, looking back after all of this, is the fact that we're still here. The MPO
Yes.
still exists. We're a
Yes.
viable organization. There's enough interest in the MPO where you and I are having this conversation every week about it. So, bravo.
And how do you think Ivan Michailov should be remembered in Bulgaria, in North Macedonia, in the MPO, in the all other people from the diaspora who came from former Yugoslavia, who are also Macedonians in other way, but still Macedonians? When we find the most important thing about his personality and the role he played in the history of the Macedonian liberation movement, what should be known about this person? What should be known about his place in the MPO? And why this should be important, equally important for all of us, despite the country that we live now, and despite of our complex, plural identity that we might have.
First of all, that's a really, really good question. And there's an awful lot to be said from all that. And it's really important. But as you were asking your question just now, my mind is just I'm kind of looking back on things and thinking about what I know. And we had, Vemitol was formed late 19th century. Ilinden, 1903. The remnants of those that fought in Ilinden, they kept the struggle alive, whether it was in Serbia, Greece, later, Greece and Yugoslavia, and the work that Todor Alexandrov did. And then we lost Todor Alexandrov. And then Ivan Mihailov merges. So we take everything that happened before he assumed leadership of Vemitol, and that is just a big chunk of our history. And all of those events that took place, that's what got us here. And when I say here, I'm talking about the United States and Canada, and created the MPO. And those people were keeping that dream alive of a free and independent Macedonia that their involvement in it, you know, caused them to have to leave. So I, from the things I've heard in my family and other people say, and just you put it all together and then you read a little bit here and you find out something there. Ivan Mihailov was the glue, the mortar. He's the one that held it all together. He's the one that everybody looked to for guidance and for shaping the MPO into what it has become. So, how do we look back on him? If Ivan Mihailov didn't keep it going, if he didn't just continue the work started by those before him, the MPO may not exist as it does now. And what the MPO has been able to do, and what I really hope it can do, is to just keep our history alive. So many people want to change the narrative. They want to change the facts. They want to twist them enough to substantiate whatever they think. But the MPO, for the most part, has done a pretty good job of just maintaining that straight line view, not trying to skew it one way or the other. And I think it's because of Ivan Mihailov's leadership, but maybe more than the leadership, just the respect that people had for him. I mean, you walk into a convention now, you're going to see his picture. You're going to see you've seen it. You've been to conventions.
Yes.
He's right there with Gotse Delchev, with Todor Alexandrov, and all the other heroes and heroines of the movement. And that respect that they had for him and what he wanted to accomplish, that was the driving force. And that was such a vital part of our history. We can't lose it. Now, okay, there's a lot of people that may disagree, with his viewpoint, his leadership, whatever. There's always going to be those that disagree. The point is, enough of the people that believed in him and worshipped is a bad word, that respected him, and those are the ones that made the MPO what it is. And that's why it still exists. So we always need to keep him up there in that place of prominence. And not so much for what he did, but I think more for what he stood for and what he represented to those people who established the MPO. To hear my mother talk about Ivan Mihailov, I mean, this was like, somebody who she couldn't reach. It was like, we put our heroes on these big pedestals. And for my mother and my father and my grandparents, Ivan Mihailov. I mean, I can remember my father was on the Central Committee in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were having a meeting in Detroit. And, there were some changes that were taking place with the Macedonian Tribute. And the information's all there if people want to look back and see what happened. But they called Ivan Mihailov. And I remember my father saying that he was on the phone and they were listening to him speak at the meeting. And, my father had the opportunity to speak with him. What was said, what was done is not important. Just the respect and the reverence with which my father told me about speaking with Ivan Mihailov. It was just, I knew how important he was to him. I mentioned some of my friends that I met from Toronto. They described to me, they got the opportunity to visit Rome and to see Ivan Mihailov and to meet with him and to talk with him. And that was a big moment in their lives. And to hear them telling me about it. So without like making a long story even longer, just that respect that people had for this leader, for the man who like everybody looked to when they started the MPO. I think that right there says a lot. And that respect and that admiration for him was a driving force in keeping the MPO on point, on direction, on what it wanted to be. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I jumped all over the place there.
Mr. Chachoff, all the time when we were speaking, I was thinking about the polar star. And sometimes people need this star to show them the direction.
Yeah.
To give.
That's a good reference.
Yeah.
That's a good reference.
Mr. Chachoff, it was an amazing interview. And I'm really thankful for the possibility to have this talk with you. I hope we will continue our conversations in the future.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm enjoying it. And, sitting here, when I saw what today's topic was, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to say. But it came easy. And to kind of sum it all up, I really wish I had the opportunity that others did, where I got to see this man, meet this man, talk to him. Sorry, I'm breaking up a little bit here, but it's just, he was idolized, and I think he was very true to himself and to what his foundation was, and he stayed with that. And that's why I'm almost crying now talking about, what an awesome opportunity it would have been to have met him. But it's okay.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. This is awesome. And we'll do it again soon.
Yeah. Next week.
Next week.